Yeah, that works.
Can you tell us a bit about your role as the big dog?
Yeah, I would love to. So my role as the superintendent of public instruction, I serve on the State Board of Education as one of their voting members, as well as the Land Board, who oversees our public lands in Idaho, and the beneficiaries of that trust on the Land Board happens to be Idaho Public Schools. So basically, in a nutshell, there's money received to the students of Idaho from your superintendent participating on the Land Board. So as well as those two, I'm also the chairwoman for Idaho School for the Deaf and the Blind.
Okay.
Yes, and I oversee the programs for the state of Idaho, such as free and reduced lunch, special education, accountability and testing, transportation, just to name a few. I have over 131 employees as well, and my job is to make sure once the legislature enacts laws, whether that be new or reviewing older statutes, that I go out to the schools and connect with them and educate them on what's expected. Also, my job is to submit a budget for K through 12 schools each year to ensure that the students of Idaho have the resources that they need.
We had quite a few staff members when we sent out that poll. Quite a few of them asked about the ISATs.
Oh, okay.
Specifically, why we still have them. So do you have any comments on that?
Yes, so the ISAT, short for Idaho State Achievement Test, is a requirement. Across the nation, we are required to have some sort of measure to see where our students are in English, language arts, and math. This is not something that just goes on in Idaho. It's a nationwide requirement. Now, how we do that is left up to the state. What test we choose is left up to each individual state. I think, as an educator myself, where it kind of went a little south is that test was originally put into place to gauge resources. So, for example, if you were struggling in math, it would make sense that you would direct more resources to math. If you were struggling in English language arts, according to the students' test scores, you would direct more of that money towards English language arts. I think what happened during the No Child Left Behind years, and most educators know what I'm referring to, is it started to be used in a negative light. And was used in a lot of accountability systems, used to judge the system, and that was not the original intent. I'm beginning to see the original intent of the achievement test swing back towards the other direction and being used for more of a resource-based, making sure a planning model. But there are still some folks out there who want to take a look at those test scores and jump to some conclusions and about particular school districts. Now, I always tell everybody this, it's not, we don't like testing, nobody likes it, but I don't know a parent on the face of this earth that is not interested in how their student is doing, and that's pretty much one of the ways to gauge how their child is doing.
Have you guys considered any merit-based ways of gauging students to accompany, like the PSATs or the ISATs or SATs or things like that?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question. So what we're looking at right now is something called mastery-based education, and I said, mastery-based education, folks will ask me all the time, what is that? What are you talking about, Superintendent? I said, you've seen it. It's project-based learning. It's called competency-based learning. It's been called many things. And so it's the opportunity to meet the students where they're at and help them. If they're struggling in math, they can stay in math a little bit longer. If they're an overachiever in reading, then they don't have to sit there and wait for the entire class to catch on. They can move on and work on something that they're struggling at. We've already started that process in the state of Idaho. We had 20 incubator schools begin the mastery-based approach to learning because, simply put, it's personalized learning. It's more than just a test score. It's not the teacher standing in front of the class and talking at kids. It's kids being really involved in their learning and taking responsibility for that and working on the things that they need to work on and moving on when they have the opportunity to move on.
Are you guys planning on making that a statewide thing to go with the ISAT? Or
So
just local?
that's a good question too, and I told this story yesterday. So once upon a time, to answer your question, there was a little girl who showed up in 2nd grade to a brand new elementary school building, and it was an open classroom, which meant there was no walls. Everybody was just in a great big pod, they called it. No grade levels, no walls, and the superintendent on the day of the opening of this brand new building looked at the crowd and looked at all the teachers and said, "Today we are starting mastery-based education and you will teach that way." And he walked away. And the teachers all looked at each other and said, We're starting mastery-based today?" And so this little girl went into the building and sat down in her seat and could hear the 5th grade teacher. Now remember, she's only in 2nd grade. She could hear the 5th grade teacher teaching math. Kids didn't know where they were going. Teachers were miserable. Students felt out of place. That little girl showed up in 3rd grade to construction workers everywhere, putting walls up. Everybody was back in their own grade levels. There was no pods. It took about 2 years to recover from that. That is an example of something called a top-down approach, where the superintendent comes in and says, "You're going to do this,"
Yeah.
and blindsides everybody. Do you know who that little girl was? It was me.
Oh.
So it was about 4th grade before we all recovered from that. Before the teachers recovered, before the students recovered, before the parents recovered, it took a couple of years. And so my number one goal has been to travel the state and say, if your community is not ready for this, I am not going to be the superintendent that says you will do this.
On the topic of state mandated procedures, what is your opinion of senior projects?
I have heard a lot of feedback on senior projects, and I think if it's meaningful and the student is engaged in part of that, it's helpful. But if it just becomes a box checking event where it takes time away and is not meaningful, that's not the goal of a senior project. And so as I've traveled the state, there has been wide support actually from students about their senior project and what it meant to them, having the opportunity to do that. I always hear a couple negative stories. That's not surprising, about how it's was a box checking event. It was just a paper that they had to do to turn in. But for the most part, that's been a huge topic of conversation. It is a graduation requirement, and there is a lot of flexibility in that now.
Do you have any last additional comments you'd like to put out there before we wrap it up?
I would like to say that your school, it was fabulous to visit this morning, that you all, often we hear about how teenagers don't interact, they don't shake your hand, I would just like to put a plug in for your high school. That is absolutely not true. You all met me at the door, greeted me this morning, a handshake. I think you guys are doing a great job, and I'm excited to go out and join you for your career technical education fair. Kudos to you all. Emmy, you did a great job. When you're famous someday, please remember the state superintendent, Ybarra, please. So kudos to your school. You have a lot to be proud of.